Intro, cinematic tone. Narrator, deep engaging. Mount Vernon, the grand estate of America's first president, George Washington. We all know Washington as the general who led a revolution and as the leader who helped shape a nation. But behind the marble statues and history books was a man who sat down to dinner just like the rest of us. And what he ate tells a story that's richer, stranger, and far more revealing than most people realize. Visuals: drone shot of Mount Vernon, cut to dining table set with 18th century food, close-up of steaming bread and roasted meats. Narrator: tonight we are taking you inside Mount Vernon's kitchens into the heart of Washington's daily life. Not through politics, not through battlefields, but through food. These are 25 dishes that George Washington actually ate, foods that shaped his table and his times. Quick montage: loaves of cornbread pulled from a hearth, roasted duck, a bowl of hominy grits, colonial-style desserts. Narrator: and be warned, some of these dishes are delicious, others unusual, and a few may shock you. Because in the 18th century, food wasn't just nourishment. It was survival, identity, and even power. Segment 1. Bread and Daily Staples. Narrator: let's begin where every Washington meal began, with bread. Washington's household consumed bread every single day, and not the refined, factory-made loaves we know today. We're talking dense, hearty loaves baked in a wood-fired oven. Visuals: a cook pulls rustic bread from a brick oven. Narrator: cornbread, rye bread, wheat rolls. The Mount Vernon kitchen produced them constantly. Enslaved cooks and kitchen workers would rise early to knead the dough and bake for the entire household. Guests at Mount Vernon often recalled being served fresh, warm bread with nearly every meal. Close-up: a slice of butter melting into cornbread. Narrator: cornbread especially was central. Corn was cheap, plentiful, and local. Washington's estate produced it in abundance, and enslaved workers ground it into meal. Cornbread wasn't just food, it was culture, a tie to Native American traditions and colonial survival. Segment 2. Hominy and grits. Narrator: but bread wasn't the only grain staple. Washington also ate hominy and grits, dishes made by soaking corn kernels in lye, a Native American practice known as nixtamalization. This process made the corn more nutritious, and it became a Southern staple. Visuals: a steaming bowl of grits being served with butter. Narrator: in Washington's time, grits were often served plain or flavored with butter, cream, or sometimes molasses. Imagine the President of the United States eating a simple bowl of grits at breakfast. It happened often. Segment 3. Fish in Chesapeake abundance. Narrator: now let's move from grains to the waters of the Chesapeake Bay. Washington loved fish. In fact, Mount Vernon sat near the Potomac River, where herring and shad were abundant. Each spring, enslaved workers fished massive hauls, providing food for the estate and profit for Washington. Visuals: reenactment of fishermen hauling nets filled with shad. Narrator: shad, herring, catfish, these were common on Washington's table. Sometimes pickled, sometimes roasted, sometimes fried. Shad roe, the fish eggs, was considered a delicacy. Guests often remarked on the freshness of Mount Vernon's fish, straight from the river. Segment 4. Meat and roasted feasts. Narrator: of course, a man of Washington's status also dined on meat. Beef, lamb, venison, and especially pork were central to his diet. Roasted meats were served at large dinners, often carved at the table for guests. Visuals: a large roast being sliced, candlelit dining scene. Narrator: pork, in particular, was essential. Washington's plantation raised hogs, which were slaughtered in the winter. The meat was salted, smoked, and preserved, feeding the household year-round. Narrator. And then there was venison. Friends and neighbors sometimes gifted Washington with venison, which was roasted or made into pies. For an elite Virginian gentleman, venison was both a delicacy and a mark of status. Segment 5. Beverages and Morning Routine. Narrator. But what about drinks? Washington's mornings almost always began with tea or coffee. Tea, imported from overseas, carried both flavor and symbolism. Though Washington opposed British taxes, he never gave up his taste for good tea. Visuals. Tea being poured into porcelain cups. Narrator. Coffee, too, became a staple, served with breakfast, often alongside bread and butter. Washington also enjoyed hot chocolate made from cacao and sugar, a luxury item in his day. Close-up, rich chocolate drink being stirred with cream. Narrator. And when it came to alcohol, Washington's estate produced beer and distilled whiskey. Mount Vernon's distillery was one of the largest in early America, producing thousands of gallons each year. At the table, Madeira wine, a fortified wine from Portugal, was Washington's favorite. Segment 6. Seasonal and Garden Produce. Narrator. Finally, no Mount Vernon meal was complete without vegetables and fruits from the estate's gardens. Washington ate beans, peas, cabbages, turnips, carrots, and more, grown by enslaved laborers in the fields around his mansion. Visuals. Freshly harvested vegetables on a wooden table. Narrator. In summer, peaches, apples, and cherries sweetened the table. In fall, pumpkins and squash arrived. Washington's letters even mention his fondness for melons, which he grew himself. Closing of Batch 1. Narrator. These were the staples, the foods that grounded daily life at Mount Vernon. Bread, fish, meat, drink, and produce. But as we go deeper into Washington's table, we'll find dishes that were stranger, rarer, and sometimes surprisingly modern. From pickled delicacies to colonial desserts, the next foods will reveal sides of George Washington you've never imagined. Visuals. Fade out on Mount Vernon kitchen hearth, flames glowing in the dark. Batch 2. Refined dining at Mount Vernon. Narrator. Steady, cinematic. Beyond bread and meat, Mount Vernon's table revealed a world of refinement. Washington was disciplined in appetite, but he was also a gentleman of status. And status meant entertaining guests with a table rich in flavor and variety. Visuals. Long dining table at Mount Vernon, lit by flickering candles. Oysters and shellfish. Narrator. Oysters were a colonial favorite, and the Chesapeake Bay provided them in abundance. At Mount Vernon, they were roasted, stewed, or baked into pies. Guests often recalled Washington's table filled with fresh seafood, proof of the estate's connection to the bay. Visuals. Oyster stew simmering in a clay pot. Pickled and preserved foods. Narrator. With no refrigeration, preservation was survival. Pickled cucumbers, beans, and onions lined the shelves of Mount Vernon's kitchens. Martha Washington was known for her preserves, jams of peaches and plums sweetened with sugar, enjoyed in winter when fresh fruit was scarce. Visuals. Glass jars glowing with preserved fruits and vegetables. Martha Washington's recipes. Narrator. Martha's manuscript cookbook recorded dishes still legendary today. Her great cake, dense with fruit, nuts, and brandy, was a centerpiece for holidays. Puddings and tarts, flavored with cinnamon or nutmeg, balanced the savory roasts with sweetness. Visuals. Colonial cake sliced, fruit glistening inside. Luxury imports. Narrator. Washington's meals also carried the taste of the world. Madeira wine from Portugal was his favorite, ordered by the barrel. Exotic spices like cinnamon and cloves added richness to everyday dishes. Sugar, imported at high cost, sweetened puddings and chocolate, transforming the table into a statement of wealth. Visuals: Madeira poured into crystal, exotic spices spread across a wooden counter. Soups and stews. Narrator. No dinner was complete without soups or stews. Vegetable broths, oyster soup, and hearty meat stews often opened the meal. Guests described plentiful soups that gave way to the main courses, an echo of European dining adapted to Virginian soil. Visuals: a copper pot bubbling with stew, steam rising in soft light. The art of entertaining. Narrator. For Washington, food was more than nourishment. It was hospitality and diplomacy. Dinners stretched for hours, filled with conversation and candlelight. Though reserved in personality, Washington's table spoke with confidence. Bread, wine, meat, and sweets. They were not only meals but symbols of his place in the new nation. Visuals: a reenactment of a Mount Vernon feast, Washington at the head of the table. Closing of Batch 2. Narrator. So far, we've seen the staples and the refinements: oysters, pickled relishes, Martha's cakes, Madeira wine, and rich soups. But the Mount Vernon table still holds more. In the next chapter, we uncover Washington's love for game birds, cider, and the experimental crops that tied him to the land he cherished. Visuals: fade on Mount Vernon gardens at dusk. Batch 3, Game Gardens and Orchards. Narrator. Cinematic, calm. Beyond the main hall and kitchens, Mount Vernon's vast estate provided Washington with another treasure: the bounty of his gardens, orchards, and the surrounding wilderness. Here, every season brought new flavors to his table. Visuals: Mount Vernon gardens swaying in the breeze, deer moving through the forest edge. Game birds and venison. Narrator. Hunting was both necessity and tradition. Washington's lands teemed with wild turkey, ducks, and geese. Venison was highly prized, roasted slowly before the hearth, its rich flavor considered the height of refinement. Guests often recalled dining on roasted game birds, a taste of Virginia's wilderness served with elegance. Visuals: a wild turkey prepared over open flame, golden and crisp. Mount Vernon's orchards. Narrator. Rows of apple, peach, and cherry trees filled Mount Vernon's orchards. Apples became cider, peaches turned into brandied preserves, and cherries flavored pies on summer evenings. Washington was particularly fond of cider, brewed from his own orchards and served alongside hearty meals. Visuals: a rustic cider press, golden liquid flowing into a barrel. Fresh vegetables. Narrator. Washington believed strongly in the value of fresh produce. The kitchen gardens grew beans, peas, cabbage, carrots, and squash, ingredients for stews and side dishes. Martha oversaw the rotation of crops, ensuring the family's table was never without greens, even in the colder months through root cellars and storage pits. Visuals: harvest baskets overflowing with beans, squash, and carrots. Fish from the Potomac. Narrator. The Potomac River was a lifeline. Washington's enslaved workers netted shad and herring in massive hauls each spring. These fish were smoked, salted or eaten fresh. Records show barrels of salted fish stored for the year, sustaining both the household and laborers on the estate. Visuals: nets pulled from the river, silver fish glinting in the morning sun. Seasonal eating. Narrator: meals were deeply tied to the rhythm of the seasons. Spring brought tender greens and lamb, summer offered fresh fruits and fish, autumn provided apples, squash, and game, and winter called for preserved goods, pickles, salted meats, dried cornmeal, and warming stews. Washington's table was a living calendar of nature's cycles. Visuals: 4 quick seasonal transitions across the Mount Vernon landscape. Closing of Batch 3. Narrator: the estate itself was Washington's larder. Game from the forest, fish from the river, fruits from the orchards, and vegetables from the gardens all came together under Martha's supervision. Yet this was only part of the story. In the next chapter, we uncover the indulgences, imported luxuries, and festive meals that transformed Mount Vernon into more than a farm. It was a stage for the new nation's first president. Visuals: candlelight dinner scene fading into the glow of Madeira wine. Batch 4. Indulgence, luxury, and festivity. Narrator: deep, steady tone. While Mount Vernon thrived on self-sufficiency, George and Martha Washington also enjoyed the finer things. Imported luxuries and festive feasts added brilliance to the daily rhythm of bread, meat, and cider. Here, indulgence met practicality, reminding us that the Washingtons lived not only as farmers, but also as figures of status. Visuals: Mount Vernon dining hall set with silverware, candles, and crystal glasses. Imported wines. Narrator: among Washington's indulgences, none was greater than wine. Madeira, imported from Portugal, was his favorite. He ordered it by the barrel, ensuring it flowed at official dinners and private meals alike. Guests described his table always adorned with wine, an emblem of both hospitality and sophistication. Visuals: Madeira poured slowly into a delicate glass, golden in the candlelight. Chocolate and tea. Narrator: chocolate was another luxury, consumed as a thick drink flavored with sugar and spices. Tea, despite its political symbolism after the Boston Tea Party, remained a staple at Mount Vernon. Washington, ever practical, continued to import it for his household. For guests, a cup of chocolate or tea at Mount Vernon was a taste of refinement in the new nation. Visuals: hot chocolate steaming in a porcelain cup, a teapot resting beside fresh scones. Sugar, spices, and imported goods. Narrator: sugar was costly, yet essential for desserts and preserves. Spices such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves transformed otherwise simple dishes into delicacies. These ingredients arrived through transatlantic trade, connecting Mount Vernon's kitchen to a vast global network, from Caribbean plantations to European markets. Visuals: hands sprinkling cinnamon and nutmeg over baked tarts. Festive meals. Narrator: holidays and celebrations brought feasting. At Christmas, roasted goose or beef might appear, accompanied by pies filled with apples or mincemeat. Cakes and pudding sweetened the table, while wine and punch filled the glasses. These moments reflected not just appetite, but community and tradition. Visuals: colonial Christmas feast, candles glowing, evergreen garlands hung above the table. Hospitality as diplomacy. Narrator: for Washington, entertaining was more than pleasure, it was duty. Guests from across America and even Europe dined at Mount Vernon. Each meal became a subtle act of diplomacy, with the menu carefully chosen to show abundance, refinement, and the promise of a prosperous young nation. Visuals: guests seated, Washington presiding at the head of the table, calm yet commanding. Closing of batch 4. Narrator: wine, chocolate, imported spices, and festive roasts. These indulgences gave Mount Vernon its sense of grandeur. The meals reflected Washington's dual identity, a man of the soil and a leader of the world. But the story is not complete without looking at the labor and unseen hands that made these meals possible. In our final chapter, we uncover the role of enslaved cooks, the hidden labor of Mount Vernon, and how their contributions shaped the very food that defined George Washington's table. Visuals: fade from glittering feast to the quiet, shadowed kitchens below stairs.